Good morning, children. Welcome to English class. Children, in today's session, we are going to discuss the seventh lesson, The Tale of Peter Rabbit. The name of the lesson is The Tale of Peter Rabbit, and the theme of the lesson is Adventure and Imagination. Now, let us read the text first, children. Once upon a time, there were four little rabbits. Their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cocktail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. So here, once upon a time, long back, there were four little rabbits are there. And the names of the four little rabbits were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cocktail, and Peter. So these are the names of the four little rabbits. So these four little rabbits lived with their mother in a sandbank. So sandbank means small hill made up of sand. So sand hill. So which is underneath the root of a very big fir tree. So the sandbank or the sand hill is below under the root of a very big fir tree. Okay. Now next. Now, my dears, said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out. So one day, the mother rabbit said to the four little rabbits, that is Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter, that now you can go into the fields or down into the field. Wherever you want, you go into the fields or down the lane. But remember that don't go to Mr. McGregor's garden. You may go to the fields or the lane, but don't go into his garden. And now run along and don't get into mischief. Don't get into mischief means don't be naughty. So whatever you want in the field, whatever you want to do down the lane, you can, but don't go to Mr. McGregor's garden, as well as don't be naughty. And said mother to the four little rabbits that now I'm going out. If you want, you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go to Mr. McGregor's garden and don't be naughty. Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's shop. After saying these words to the little four rabbits, Mother Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and she went through the wood to the baker's shop. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. Now, out of four, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cocktail are very good little bunnies, very good little rabbits. So, those three rabbits went down to the lane to gather the blackberry. However, Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. Now, the three little rabbits, Flopsy, Mopsy, Cocktail, they went down into the lane, but Peter was very naughty. So what Peter did, as Mother Rabbit warned not to go to Mr. McGregor's garden, now Peter did the same. Peter went to the McGregor's garden and it squeezed. First he ate some lettuce and some beans. Then he ate some radishes. Then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. Peter entered Mr. McGregor's garden through the gate. First, Peter ate the lettuce, then some beans. After eating these two, Peter ate some radishes, then felt rather sick and it want to eat something like a leafy vegetable. So parsley means leafy vegetable. So Peter ate first lettuce, some beans, some radishes. Then he want to eat some leafy vegetables. So he was looking around for the leafy vegetables. Around the end of a cucumber frame Whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? As Peter was searching for the leafy vegetables there round the end of cucumber frame, that is, cucumber frame means where the place where cucumbers are grown. So Peter went to the cucumber frame. There he saw and met Mr. McGregor. You can see here in the picture, he is the person McGregor. Then Mr. McGregor, who was on his hands and knees planting young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Now you can see here in the picture. When Peter went to the cucumber frame, McGregor was planting some young cabbages. The saplings of the young cabbage he is planting. So when Peter saw McGregor also saw the Peter. After seeing Peter, all of a sudden at once he jumped and ran after Peter, waving a rake. Now you can see here in the picture, rake, and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Now he shouted that, "Stop, thief!" Peter is running. McGregor also running back of the Peter, and he's shouting like, "Stop, thief!" Next, Peter was most dreadful frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. As McGregor was running back of the Peter, Peter was very much frightened. It was fearful, so very feared, and it also started running, and back of the Peter, Mr. McGregor was running. So Peter rushed all over the garden. He tried to go out of the garden, but Peter has forgotten the way how to go out. So it was running all around in the garden. So as Peter was running, he lost one of his shoes among the cabbages only. As he was trying to escape from Mr. McGregor's, Peter was running around the cabbage fields, so it lost one of his shoes among the cabbages only, and the other shoes among the potatoes. Then, after losing them, he ran on four legs. He might have got away if he had not run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears. Now, as he was running to escape from Mr. McGregor's, at last he had lost his shoes, one shoe in the cabbages and one shoe among the potatoes. Now he is running with all his four legs. So he might have got away if he had not run into the gooseberry's net. Now, as Peter was trying to escape from there, what happened? Peter was trying to escape from Mr. McGregor's. He ran into the gooseberry's net. So a net which is used to catch the birds stealing the gooseberries. So as he was running, suddenly he was caught into gooseberry's net. Now he is unable to come out from it because the button of the jacket was struck to the net. As the button of the jacket was struck to the net, he is unable to come out. So the jacket is blue in color and a brass button is there for it, and the jacket is new. At last Peter has to give himself up for lost and shed big tears. Now it is not possible for him to come out there, as his button of the blue jacket stuck into the gooseberry's net. Now there is no other alternate. He left his jacket there only, as it is new and it is his favorite jacket. He shed big tears. By crying, he left his coat there only in the gooseberry net. Next, Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he had intended to use to catch Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket beside him. Now, next, McGregor came there. He came with a sieve. Sieve means it's a tool used to straining solids from liquids. So, he brought the sieve, a tool which he intended, that is, planned to use to catch the Peter. He borrowed a tool so that he can catch Peter. But when Peter saw McGregor with the sea, what happened? He wriggled out just in time. Just he left there, leaving his jacket beside him. He left the jacket and ran very fastly from that gooseberry's net. He rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Now from there he escaped, and then he ran into tool shed. There in the tool shed he jumped into the can. So in the can lot of water is there. Now it would be very beautiful if water was not there. For hiding it's very good place. But in that can many lot of water are there. Next. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Now Mr. McGregor, he knows that somewhere Peter was hiding there in the somewhere in the tool shed only. So perhaps he thought that the Peter was hiding underneath a flower pot. So he had started turning up all the flower pots, looking each flower pot, and he is turning down, reverse, upside down, he is making the flower pots. Peter sneezed, critical. So as Mr. McGregor was turning up all the flower pot, Peter, who was hiding in the can, shouted that critical. Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. Now, as Mr. McGregor was turning up all the flower pots, Peter shouted critical. As he shouted, Mr. McGregor looked at the Peter within no time. Then he tried to put his foot on Peter, but immediately Peter jumped out of the window, which is there in the tool shed. The window was too small. Even McGregor also tried to run back of the Peter, but the window was too small, so he tried to come out, but it is not possible, as it is not possible for him. Now Mr. McGregor was very tired as he was running after the Peter, so he tried to go through the window, but it is not possible. That's why Peter went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright, and had no idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp with sitting in that can. After a time, he began to wander about, looking all round. Luckily, Peter escaped from the tool shed from Mr. McGregor. Then finally he came out and sat down to take rest. Now he was out of breath as he was running very fastly. He was out of breath. He sat there, took rest, and now Peter was trembling with fright. Now Peter was very afraid and frightened that he had escaped from Mr. McGregor, and he had no idea which way to go. He forgot the way to go out from the garden, and also Peter was very damp, that is, he was very wet as he sat in the water can. After some time, Peter began to wander about in the garden here and there, looking all around. He is trying to go out of the garden. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. He came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. Now, at last, Peter found a door which is there in the wall, but the door was locked. There are no rooms or no way to go out there to squeeze itself underneath so that rabbit can go into another room. He tried to find his straight way so that he can go out of the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. As he is moving on in the garden, he became more and more puzzled to which way he has to go. At last, Peter reached a pond where Mr. McGregor filled the pond with water cans. So at the water pond, a white cat was there. A white cat was staring, that is, looking at the goldfish. She sat very still. Now she is observing the goldfish. She is concentrating. The white cat is concentrating on the goldfish. So Peter thought that it is the best way not to speak to her. So without speaking to the white cat, he can leave that place. So he heard many stories about black cat from his cousin Benjamin Bunny. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scratch, 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 scritch. It was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Now, as Peter was running here and there in the garden, it is trying to find the way to go out. At last, once again, Peter went back to the tool shed only. There, suddenly, what happened? Quite close. Suddenly, Peter went very close to Mr. McGregor. Then he heard the noise of the hoe. Hoe means here a tool which had a long handle. So he is trying to dig the soil so that he can sow the onions. So as sound is coming from that like scratch, scratch, scritch, as Mr. McGregor is sowing the onions. Next, his back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Now his back was turned towards the Peter, and behind the back of Mr. McGregor, there was the gate. So Peter saw the gate so that it can go out from the garden. Peter started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. So as Peter observed the gate back of Mr. McGregor, Peter ran very fast as he could along a straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. He ran very fastly. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. Now Mr. McGregor, he saw the Peter at the corner, but Peter did not care him as he is going out of the garden. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Peter ran very fast as he could, straight walk behind some blackcurrant bushes. McGregor saw Peter, but Peter did not care him. It ran very fastly, slipped underneath the gate, and was safe at last. Peter was safe, and it ran into the wood. Peter ran very fastly into the forest from the garden. Okay, from the garden it escaped and ran fastly into the forest, and finally it reached its home. Okay, that is the story about the tale of Peter Rabbit. Okay, now with this we'll close today's session, children. Now coming to today's year homework, read lesson 7, the tale of Peter Rabbit. In tomorrow's session we will revise the lesson, then I'll show you the video of the lesson. Okay children? Okay, that's it for today. See you in the next session. Bye children.